Up here we go. Excellent. Thanks for being with us. I'm Penny, and this is Tara. We're part of the Death Network. We're a doula collective in San Diego, and we're also super passionate about greener disposition at end of life, and just sharing the education on why those options are important and how we can access them as a community. So that's what we're here for today. It's just to have that discussion. Like I said, I'm a death doula. I transitioned into this career about 3 years ago. As my parents were aging, I got a little glimpse of the end of life profession. I was completely saddened by what I was stepping into. I just think that there's such a lack of transparency. There's a lack of options. There's a lack of authenticity. And that experience really just kind of moved me into this field. And I love bringing back some of our time honored, what do we do?
Like practices and traditions and community death care, right? That's how we used to do it and how we'd like to see it done.
Yeah. And that includes green burial. So that's a little bit about me. We have 3 folks joining us tonight on our panel. Tara's one of them sitting next to me. We have Ed Bixby from the Global Green Burial Alliance and Jamie Phillips from Spirit Sanctuary Conservation Cemetery in New York. And I'm going to answer this question. I'm going to ask all 3 of you this question. And the question is, what do I want people to walk away with today? And I just want people to understand that they have more options than they're probably going to be offered at a funeral home. And that includes green burial, water cremation, conservation burial, natural organic reduction. There's a lot of things that are emerging that are friendlier to our bodies and the planet. And I just want people to understand that those are an option and how they can access them. So I'll turn it over to you, Tara.
Hi, I'm Tara. I'm also a death doula. I've been working with Penny for about 2 years now. And I'll just go ahead and answer your question. I am hoping that we walk away invigorating a community. I want to add every one of you to our community to help us push for this here in San Diego County. It's not easy. There's a lot of bureaucracy and it's very litigated, and we're running into, roadblocks here and we just don't know where exactly is the next step because of just the way it's so bureaucratic here in San Diego. But the more of us that want this, the more of us that are out here talking about it in the community, and have, we're all a resource. So each of us has something special to bring. So I hope to get today that we all get out of this, a new community and kind of a new invigoration towards pushing towards a green or conservation cemetery here in San Diego.
Thanks. Ed, I'm going to pass it to you for a brief intro. And if you could answer the question, what you hope people will walk away with today.
Sure, Penny, thanks. Ed Bixby, Global Green Burial Alliance founder and owner of Destination Destiny Memorials. Really, what it comes down to is some enlightenment, through education and transparency. I want people to take away the notion that, not only is this achievable, but you can have it. Bureaucracy doesn't have to stand in your way. There's powers in numbers. Through the Global Green Burial Alliance, we aim to connect the dots with our community. And our community is much broader than funeral providers and just advocates. It's people who really believe in what we do and can embrace environmentally friendly funeral options. So that's what I'd like to see come from this today.
Thank you. And Jamie.
So yeah, I'd like to see people walk away with real inspiration about what each of us brings to this right now, and we'll bring, what Tara was saying, the community, what inspires each of us, everybody who's listening to this today, what can we take away some inspiration as community for the change that we can, bring to our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we dive into green burial and conservation burial, we want to just talk a little bit about the history of how burial in the US came to be what we know it today, which we often refer to as American burial. And so it all kind of started around the Civil War, right?
Sure.
So before the Civil War, which is mid 1800s, folks died at home. They were cared for by their family as they were dying and transitioning at home. There was a home funeral. So the funeral was actually held in the home. And that's where the community rallied and brought meals and really came together to support the family while they were going through the grieving process and all of that. And what's interesting is also most folks were just kind of carried from their home to the local cemetery, which was green burial, right? It's just kind of how we've always done it. And during the Civil War, a new medical technique came into play.
Sure. So during the Civil War, people were loved ones were dying on the battlefield, and the loved ones at home wanted to bring their family members back, right? Welcome. We had some new incoming people here in person. So they wanted to bring their family members back home, and that's pretty difficult to do over a long distance with a body that is in its natural state. So that's sort of when embalming kind of came into fashion, right? And so around that same time, Lincoln was assassinated, and the biggest kind of push towards embalming was everybody saw him on a tour. He was heavily, heavily embalmed on a train tour around the United States. He looked like he did when he was alive-ish, and that's what people, were excited. It's new, it's different. I want that too. So that's kind of when it came into fashion here in the United States. And
I like to say he was the original influencer.
Yeah,
the influencer, right?
So there's a history of mummification and all that, but the embalming practices traditionally, now there's some options for green embalming, but chemicals are not good for the earth. They're not good for our body. And so that kind of changed how we do burial as well, right? You needed, more fortification to keep those chemicals out of the ground. And so with traditional American burial, you don't come in contact with the earth at all. Whether you're embalmed or not, you're in a casket and you're in a concrete vault in the ground. So a lot of people don't know about the vault, and they don't know that your body is never exposed to the earth. So you sort of just sit there embalmed and slowly take your time, kind of a little bit decomposing, but it's not natural and it's not what we're meant to do.
And it's so funny because people often get like grossed out by decomposition, but really when you think about decomposition after embalming, like that's almost even just, that's a whole nother level.
It's something totally different, right? It's not a natural process. We're all designed just like, any sort of, you put your food scraps in the compost, that's designed to decompose, and so are we. So, that's just kind of how you continue the cycle, right? Yeah.
So that's how we got to where we are today, and why there are so many rules and restrictions around burial in the US, because those rules and restrictions are built around keeping that toxicity from touching the land. So what we're trying to do is really just common sense, right? Like we just want to return our bodies back to the earth, complete the circle of life. It's super simple, but in our modern world, it's just become a little bit more complicated maybe than it needs to be. So that's why we're here having this conversation today.
And, for me, it really is just something that's close to my heart and always has been since I was a kid. I want to return to the earth, and, I bury my pets in my backyard, and they're there always, right? They have become the trees or the birds or the mycelium network that's in my backyard or whatever it is. And it brings me a lot of solace and just makes me feel happy that they get to be there forever, even if it's in a different form. And I want that for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So here in California, we have, near San Diego, we have Fallbrook Masonic Cemetery that has a green section. It's very small. It continues to get sold out, which is super interesting. And then we have Joshua Tree, which is actually a really nice environment. And then I think there's a couple up in LA and then Northern California, but here where we are south, there's really, really nothing down here. So we are on a mission to make that happen. So I'm going to turn it over to Ed, who is going to talk about green burial. And then we're going to have Jamie piggyback on that with conservation burial, because conservation just kind of takes it one step further. So, Ed, you've got 15 minutes to unpack all that green burial is. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready. I'm ready. Thank you, ladies. That was a good description, as to what the history is of traditional versus green. And and the audience needs to understand that, even when it comes to religious belief, green burial is nothing new. I mean, many religious faiths practice green burial on a daily basis. They know that as burial. So we all do understand that this is something that has been around since the dawn of time. And it's critically important, not only to the environment, but also to our families, when it comes to spirituality or a greater sense of acceptance of one's passing. I always say that, the true definition of a natural burial is the family participation aspect, and then the environmental aspect is the true is the benefit that you receive too. So, at the end of the day, a natural burial, why it matters is there's a few different levels here, financially, certainly, spiritually, environmentally. When I say the word financially, at the end of the day, believe it or not, the consumers that are turning to natural burial, oddly enough, are cremation converts. That's what we see. People who wanted something simple and couldn't or didn't understand they could receive that. So they chose a cremation, not because they wanted to be cremated, but it didn't have the expense and it didn't have all the things that went along with the traditional burial that they were not looking for. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the idea that they can go out on their terms with a simple burial, a natural burial, it changes their mind. And nationally, a natural burial, just for the audience here, certainly it's one of those things where some people would say it's what the market can bear, and that's not true. But what I'm saying is, if you're maybe in a major metropolitan marketplace, it might be a little more expensive than it would be nationally. On the national level, it's typically between $2,500 and $3,500 for a burial plot nowadays. That's kind of what we're seeing across the board when it comes to a natural burial. And with an open close fee, the family's probably coming in less than half of what a traditional burial would be, but it would be more money than a direct cremation or a simple cremation. But the irony of that situation is the families are seeing the benefits of the spiritual aspect, and that's why they're choosing it. Because with a cremation, you lose the memorialization and the celebration a lot of times that go into caring for your loved one in death. And what's really interesting about this is, and I've been doing this for 20 years, and I can tell you, it always is the same. We will say to them, you can actively participate in this, with your family, and you ladies are death doulas, so you understand how this works. You know why it's so important, not only for the person who's passing, because a lot of times people are in hospice and things like that, to come to grips with it, but the families as well. It should be a true celebration of a life that was lived. Certainly you're going to be grief stricken because someone's passing, but at the end of the day, we all go to the same place. So to be less fearful of it and to embrace the idea that this is the final act of kindness for someone to bestow upon them also helps the living come to grips and feel good about the entire process as well. As a family comes and they're there standing in nature, whether it be a hybrid model scenario, which is like a traditional cemetery with a section, or a conservation burial scenario like what Jamie has, to be able to be part of that, transforms people. Because people will say, I don't know if I can actually participate, because it's not a conversation or a subject people really want to be involved in. But when it unfolds, they find themselves compelled to be part of that process. And you can see the pain wash away, and you can see them really genuinely embrace this and say to themselves, this is the way it should be. So, we're just reintroducing ourselves to something that we've done since the dawn of time. It's in our DNA to do so. As you care for your loved ones in birth, we care for our loved ones in death, and it should be that way. And, environmentally, it makes all the sense in the world to recycle yourself naturally, to go back to the earth, dust to dust, where we came. That's where we've all come from. We have greener funeral options now, which are absolutely wonderful, and we live in America, which is, a country where you have options and you can choose what you would like. But ultimately, why I love greener options is the conversation as people through transparency and education, it comes full circle back to a natural burial, going back to nature simply, the least carbon footprint that could possibly be, had is by digging a grave by hand, but we live in a carbon footprint world, we can't escape it. So we have to try to do better. So with a natural burial, monumentation is very different. It can be a very simple natural field stone. It can be nothing at all, or it could be a living monument, meaning a tree, a shrub. And I often say, even with cremation, let's say, if you plant a tree, and let's say, for instance, it's an oak tree and it lives for 500 years, what is the carbon offset of the tree to the carbon footprint of the life that was lived, the cremation, whatever may have went into it? Does it completely erase it? And also at the same time, imagine this. If every living human being today decided, plant me and make me a tree, what would that environmental impact look like in 50 years? Would we reverse the hands of time? The earth is very resilient. It's never too late. And it's something that we all, as human beings, should take very seriously. We have to steward this for future generations to come, for our children, our grandchildren, and the earth that we love. So, how often in life can you say something is a win all around, for the funeral provider, for the family, for the individual who passed, and for the environment. And for the funeral provider, just so you know, whether you be a funeral director or a death doula or someone who's just, an advocate that wants to participate, this really is a moving experience, and it's changing quickly. The funeral industry is taking notice to this. And I'll tell you why. I've said it for years. This is not something that you learn in a textbook. It's within your heart and your soul. That's the people who are leading this movement typically have not chosen to be funeral providers. We just fell into this, and we're just doing what feels right. And as that's being said, the funeral providers, as they start to get involved, they catch the bug too. They realize this feels good. People look at me differently now. I want to do this. And they really have a big part in what we do. So, at the end of the day, what I say is recycle yourself naturally. And people would say, why and where? And if we're looking at in Southern California, San Diego, as you had mentioned, you don't have many options. But, the low-hanging fruit are the hybrid models, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So if people go to these cemeteries and say, hey, listen, we want this. This is important to us. The providers will listen, and they will make the accommodations, believe me. And the governmental and the bureaucracy aspect, yes, is very difficult. But when you win these battles in the trenches with the hybrid models, that makes the path easier for the future conservation burial grounds, because people will be educated. The transparency of the process will be there, and they will no longer be fearful of it, and they will allow it, because people only fear what they don't understand, and we all know that. And that's rather unfortunate. So we have to lead by example. And, with the science behind natural burial, we all come from the earth. So let's return to the earth naturally. Let's become something else. If you believe that, maybe it's true. Who knows? We don't know. But maybe we do become something more, something new, a different life. But at the end of the day, isn't that better than becoming something that we're not meant to be? And that is something that, doesn't go back to the earth. And why are we resisting something we cannot change? Because at the end of the day, we all die. So if we're less fearful of death, won't we live a fuller life? In my opinion, you would feel much happier not fearing the unknown, because we'll all see each other possibly at the same place. So, when it comes to natural burial, just so everybody knows, I've gotten lots of questions over the years about, how quickly do you go back to the earth and so on and so forth. Well, that really depends on where you live, what the environment is, how much rain you may have, how much humidity. So when it comes to a natural burial, maybe it'll take 6 months, maybe it'll take 6 years. Who knows? But ultimately, you will go back to the earth as you have come. So, at the end of the day, my personal feeling is plant yourself and make a difference, and inspire others. Let's steward generations in the future to do better because we deserve it. And, let's stop trying to hide behind misnomers or mistruths or the fear of, let's face it, Hollywood and the way things have made us fearful, like, oh, cemeteries are creepy places. Prior to what you ladies were talking about with traditional burial, cemeteries were always picked to be a place of natural beauty because families visited them on a regular basis. And we have fallen away from that. So at the end of the day, when somebody goes to a place that feels good, they want to go back. And when they're part of a service and a celebration of a life that was lived and they remember that moment, who wants to remember a funeral? But at the same time, when you're remembering somebody's life and the life they lived and how special they were to you, why would you not want to remember that final act of kindness? And that's what compels you to come back and be part of what we do. So, at the end of the day, this is important work. You have to support organizations, like the Death Network and all the people who are interested in this, because again, if there's no voice, then the message cannot be heard. So I think I hit all your points and I beat that 15-minute clock. But that's how I see, natural burial, natural organic reduction, aquamation, all the things that make a big difference. I think it's important, and I think we're all here to support each other, and that's what we need to do.
Thanks for that, Ed. Yeah, I love that you rolled into those newer options that are becoming more available. We actually have an in-crowd person here as well, guys, for our online friends. And in California, organic reduction will be legal next year. So hopefully we'll start getting some of those facilities up and running too. So to Ed's point, like we envision a big shift in the current funeral profession and burial profession. We've got these emerging trends. We have the statistic of 50% of our funeral directors are in the process of currently retiring and will be retired within the next 5 years. So the reshaping of death care is actually happening right now. And it's exciting to see this movement to going back to greener, more natural things taking place.
We do have a question. Can I go ahead and answer that now?
Or
Okay,
put your questions in the chat.
We have questions in the chat, and we'll have questions in person too, and we'll answer those at the end.
We'll circle back. All right, so now we're going to go to Jamie Phillips, who's the owner of Spirit Sanctuary, which is a conservation cemetery in New York. Jamie actually lives here in San Diego now, up in Fallbrook. So Jamie, I'm going to turn it over to you. Ed hit that clock at 13 minutes. So you have a couple extra minutes. So keep talking if you want. Yeah.
So that said, or not said, I can take over. Ed, if you're indeed finished, because we'll be able to answer questions later. So yeah, everything that Ed said, I echo. We're totally on the same page. And I want to just acknowledge, first of all, Penny and Tara for bringing this forward and giving our community an opportunity to talk about what's going on here. But this can be across the globe when it comes right down to it. So you guys are doing great work, really, really good work. And I want to see more of that and more of this kind of platform. So thank you. And Ed, I have to say, I don't want to say you're the grandfather of the green burial movement, but I think that is probably fitting because years ago, I knew of you. And in fact, before we started our cemetery, it was like, yeah, Ed Bixby, yeah. In fact, I had talked to you years ago because you were the only, I thought, reasonably green cemetery, Purisma, in California. And if I, wasn't going to be buried in my backyard, I wanted to go to your cemetery. So I want to acknowledge you for the years of work you put into this, not only, across North America, but now I think, more and more across the planet. So I'm pleased to be here on a panel with you. The only question I have for you, Ed, is, I look at you and it's great, but then I see the Harley Davidson logo on it. So maybe we don't allow motorcycles in our conservation cemeteries. You'd have to leave that on the road. Just kidding. So, yeah, I came at this God, decades ago, living on a farm in West Virginia. And back in West Virginia, there was no question you got buried on your farm back in the hills. And which had been true, as Ed was talking about, for, since the beginning of humanity. You got buried almost where you died. And then it evolved into cemeteries, but still backyard burials. And backyard burials are very common, um, across the globe. And they are not allowed, frankly, in California. I think I had heard of one illegal backyard burial. And when the police came to question the old farm couple, and it was just like so obvious, even if it was against the law, the police was like, "Oh, yeah, sorry, this was an appropriate thing to do." So I think everybody's beginning to see, this is a natural thing. Like Ed said, dust to dust, but I also look at stardust. And ultimately, that's where all of this earth apparently came from, stardust. So for me, connecting to my own body, the own cellular matter in my body, which is similar to the cellular matter in every animal's body, and we dig even deeper into aspects of consciousness, perhaps even into plants and beyond. So all of those cellular bodies typically go back to the earth in one way or another. Um, Not so much in cremation, although they do ultimately, but what they create in cremation is a lot more pollution than anything else. You just look at it. You look at the carbon footprint of cremation, and it's huge. Whereas green burial, it's just the opposite. The body goes back into the earth where it came from in a natural form. And, as Tara and Penny were talking about, yeah, that's, very, very different than a cremated body or an embalmed body. Very, very different. So it's really wholesome in that sense. Um, and I'm speaking in generalities. I'll get to the differences maybe between conservation and green burial, but very few. Um, so something else for me, I look at um, personally, what early on when I was living in West Virginia, it was like, well, where's my body going to go when I die? And it was, of course, buried on the farm. So I've been thinking about that for decades, and it has never left me. But it also has encouraged me to, embrace the fact that I am going to die, and what is, how does that play out? And as we're indicating, it's kind of, people don't like to talk about death. But I've grown more and more to be inspired talking about death. And I went to a talk with some Tibetan lamas few weeks ago, and they talk about how they handle death in their community, a little bit differently than we do, but it's for the most part back to nature. They do sky burials, which is something I don't think is legal any place in America. But they can do that there, and I don't need to go into the details of that, but you can probably figure out something. And so with all the possibilities at end of life, I have to look at where do I want my body, and I go out into a natural landscape. A difference is I went to the cemetery we talked about in Fallbrook, the Masonic Cemetery, which is a hybrid cemetery. And it's like, well, can I picture my body being buried here? And it's, very different than all the tombstone part of this cemetery. It is a lawn basically with an oak tree growing there. And it's like, okay, this is how it is. Not my shtick. But would I like to be buried at a place like Parisma Cemetery, when I had cemeteries? And it's like, yeah, this place is pretty cool. I like to could walk through there now and almost pick out. I think you can probably even pick out your own burial spot there. So that I come to where I live in Fallbrook. Masonic cemetery is not my cup of tea, and but I look out. I can look out right now on conserved land, like hundreds, actually, well, I'll just say hundreds of acres out my window of conservation land. And would I like to be buried out there? It's like, oh yeah. I mean, that gets right into the thick of wild nature, and I would be, as I think, Penny and Tara talked about, you become, part of the landscape, the earth, and you can become part of the trees and the flowers and the insects when you're buried, because obviously your body breaks down, nurtures the soil, which nurtures the plants, which nurtures the birds and all the other critters. And that brings joy to me to imagine, that my body can be a gift back to the earth like that. Um, and I actually went down yesterday to a place that I think I am going to be buried when I die. And it is a wild place. It's not a cemetery, but it's very illegal. And if I were to be buried there, um, I would be subject in California to not me, but whoever buried me would get perhaps a $10,000 fine, 6 months in prison, and then they may dig up the body too. That's the law in San Diego County, I think, throughout California. Um, that's so not cool when it comes down to it, and so just appalling that that's the law. So I'm seeing here we have a chance
Wait,
to,
Jamie, really quick. You're talking about being buried in your backyard, right? Is that
well,
what you're referring to?
almost, not my
Okay.
back, but
Okay. I
not
just want to
far.
clarify for people though that like in California, it is not legal to bury in your backyard. And Jamie is considering going rogue, and we're fully supportive of him. But it's being recorded on Zoom, Jamie. So
No, I'm fine with that. If somebody wants to challenge, me on that, particularly, I'm willing to talk about it. I'll talk to the judge about it if I have to. And
Mhm.
when I'm dead, somebody else will have to do the talking. But any case, these are things that need to be talked about. I don't want to be hush about it. I think psychedelics are the same way. If everybody is hush hush about it, things don't change. But if we start talking about it, that's how change comes to pass. And not only talking, but doing something about it. Even if it goes, I mean, women would still not have the right to vote if some of them hadn't stood up and say, hey, wait, this is wrong.
Jamie, can you tell us about the model at Spirit Sanctuary?
Yes.
Thank
So Ed has already talked about it. The difference is that we don't sell plots. We sell a right to be buried in the forest. Okay, so everybody knows they're not buying a plot. They get to be a part of the forest. Um, and maybe that is the biggest difference. We don't allow, and many even green cemeteries don't allow tombstones and so on. So we don't allow that. So I think that is a huge difference. The other thing is that with the Green Burial Council, and good shout out to them, great group. They have uh, protocols for different types of cemeteries, and a conservation cemetery is their highest one. One of the reasons is it usually is specifically about regenerating the earth. So you're going to be regenerating to the earth to what it was before there was a cemetery there, before there was any development, back to native trees, native plants, embracing native wildlife, etc. That I would say is the biggest one. We might uncover some other small ones, but I'll say our first burial there. First of all, the cemetery was started. Um, Spirit Sanctuary rented land from a land trust for. It was actually just rented the land, 100-year lease at $1 a year. Not very expensive to start it. The county charged altogether, and the state maybe less than $1,000 to start the cemetery. And the first burial came even before we were open, and somebody knew about it. And they said, "Hey, these two brothers said our dad is dying. Can we bury him?" I said, "Hey, the cemetery is not open. We don't. You'd have to dig your own grave." These two brothers drove their dad in the back, dead dad in the back seat of the car, from New Hampshire over to New York, upstate New York. And they dug the grave, put Dad on the ground next to him. They dug the grave, the two brothers, and dropped Dad into it and buried him. And they, to this day, say that was the most incredible experience of their lives. And it bonded the two brothers like, never before. So that is an example of the inspiration that can come from a burial. And we allow people to dig, as many green cemeteries, families to dig the grave of their loved one. And we don't allow mechanical machines in the cemetery. So all graves are hand dug. And, that's, I think, the biggest thing I want to give is inspiration. I'm inspired because I know about the transition of my body back to the earth. I'm kind of inspired about dying. It's not such a big deal anymore. And it makes me even more passionate about, investigating what's the end of life really about. Do we die? What happens when we die? And it's all, inspirational to me and exciting. So thank you for bringing the conversation up through death cafes, which I think are wonderful, and more just conversation about end of life. So thank you, Death Network, for being such a part of this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.
I want to touch on something that you just talked about, Jamie, which was how much you're selecting this option for yourself, even though we're really unsure of where you're actually going to go, right? But you've selected this option for yourself based on who you are and how you lived your life, right? Like this is a reflection of you. And I believe that when we opt for these disposition choices that match our lifestyles, sometimes we call it our death style, right? Like I had chickens in my yard and I got farm fresh eggs every day and I grew my own vegetables organically and I recycled. Like your disposition should kind of honor how you lived your life. And I believe that when we make those choices from our heart, that it actually helps with like the grieving process, not only for us ahead of time, but also for our families. Like they know that we are resting in a place that was so connected to who we are and how we lived our life, that it can really be part of even like the grieving process. And both of you touched on cremation. Just, here in California, our cremation rates are over 70%, expected to be 80% within like this decade. And a lot of times when people opt for cremation, they also forego any sort of like ceremony or service or anything like that. And so these quick choices sometimes can really impact how we step into death and how those that are survivors that we leave behind, how they feel about how we stepped into that, so much more to consider than just, is our body going back into the ground? There's just a lot that comes along with that. So I think we can open up for Q&A. If anybody in the room here has a question, you can just raise your hand. If anybody online has a question, if you could put it in the chat. I have a couple questions from the chat that I'm going to start off with, but please add them in there if you have any. I think it was Heather that brought up sea burial. How many of you guys have heard of sea burial? Is anybody here? Okay. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So like scattering cremated remains at sea is pretty common. But actually you can do full body burial at sea. And
Neptune.
Well, here in San Diego, I know Funerals Your Way offers full body sea burial. Yeah. And
I used to get
no, that's the Trident Society, I think.
Oh,
that's a kind of a pre-need for traditional flame cremation. That's
yeah.
But
sea or something like that.
I'm not, and I think it's just flame cremation pre-need.
Yeah.
So here in San Diego, we're really lucky to have a mortuary that specializes in burial, whole body burial at sea. And in California, in the past few years, I can't remember the exact year, but it's become legal. So what that really is you get in a boat and your loved ones can be there, or it could just be the body that's going to be disposed, and you're driven, I guess, boated out to
motored out to sea,
out to a certain depth, and then you would ideally be shrouded. You could also go in a casket, but that would take longer to decompose. But it would be in a weighted shroud that has holes so that the body can sink to the bottom of the ocean. And at that depth, it takes about 45 days for someone to naturally decompose. So here in San Diego, we don't have those, green burial cemetery options. So it's kind of the easiest. It's kind of the most accessible way to have a green and natural burial here in San Diego at the moment. I think it's great. Heather, your question was where do we stand? I think it's great. I think that's what I want for my dad. He has a particular connection with the ocean, and I have a particular connection with him being decomposed naturally. So we've talked about it, and that's what we're going to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Heather, so Funerals Your Way in San Diego offers it. And then I just connected with somebody up in Northern California. I believe her organization is called Spirit Memorials, I believe. And they are calling it Blue Burial, which I just love. So it's another option that's out there. Yeah. I'm gonna hop into the chat here really quick.
So is it an option while you're looking for that to scatter ashes, even though ashes from cremation are literally toxic? Do you have to have a permit to scatter those at sea? Because I think Selena was saying you have to have a permit to have a burial at sea.
For any disposition method, you'll need a permit. So typically that permit is
toxic ashes.
For ashes, for traditional American burial, for for flame cremation or water cremation, you're going to need a permit for the disposition. So that usually typically comes through the funeral home. When you're doing the death certificate and that paperwork, they usually handle that too. They'll ask what your disposition is intended to be. Even if they do flame or aqua cremation and you get the remains back, they're going to offer a permit if you intend to scatter those or whatever that is, because you do need a permit for that final disposition.
Rhonda asks, can you have a cemetery and dig graves, or a green cemetery and dig graves with machines, but follow the other guidelines? Ed, do you want to speak to that, what the rules and regulations are to be certified green?
Sure. So, really, like Jamie had mentioned, there are, if it's a certified organization through the Green Burial Council, you have the hybrid model, you have the natural model, you have the conservation model. With the hybrid model, you would probably find that most of those organizations probably do use mechanical machinery to open the grave sites. Not all, but at the end of the day, I really think you have to take baby steps, and you have to push people forward for them to understand what the value of this actually is. So, yes, you absolutely can have a natural burial and use, a piece of machinery to do so if necessary. It's not the preferred method, but yes, it can be done most certainly. And ultimately, I think that would change over time. But I will say this, there are some, landscapes. The geology is very different around the country. So unfortunately, it may be necessary in certain areas if somebody wants to be in a family cemetery to actually use that machine to actually perform the task.
Yeah, I visited Joshua Tree Cemetery, and they're just a really lovely bunch of people that work out there, and they're super willing to talk. So of course I asked my million questions, but he said that they get up and they have to use natural light. They don't use any artificial light when they dig their graves. And so they start like right before dawn because it gets so hot out in the desert. And so I thought that was really interesting. And then I was able to watch them fill the grave too. And it was so fast. But then they filled it with dirt. And then when there was about 1.5 feet left from the surface, they put a layer of rocks. And I asked him, okay, what are the rocks for? And he said, well, just in case, then they do more dirt. But he goes like, just in case something does come and start to dig, when they get to the rocks, they'll naturally stop and move away. So that's one thing we hear all the time is people are like, well, somebody going to dig me up, or what's going to happen? Or we don't have to worry about that, right, Ed?
No, absolutely not. No.
Okay, Sonia asked what's organic reduction.
Sure. I think you're
Okay,
especially qualified to answer that one.
So natural organic reduction, or it's also referred to as human composting, is really just an expedited way of like doing green burial, right? So like with compost, the organic material comes together, it heats up and causes or fuels that decomposition. So I visited Recompose up in Seattle. They're kind of the flagship for this method. They have a whole wall of vessels. They have about 50 vessels there. You guys been there too?
No.
You got to go. Yeah. And so you go into the vessel with natural material like alfalfa and hay. You cannot be embalmed. You are naked in maybe a linen shroud or a cotton shroud or something like that, but all natural. And then the containers filled with these organic materials, and then it's heated to a certain temperature and climate controlled, and then also motion controlled. And within about 6 weeks, all of your fleshy material has turned into soil. And from there, then the bones are extracted and they are mechanically processed into bone meal, introduced back into the soil for another curing session. So all in, it takes about 3 months in this climate controlled facility. And each person will return like enough remains to fill the back of a pickup truck. It's like 3 cubic yards, I think it is. It's a ton. So it's a lot. It fills up the back of a pickup truck. You can donate it to land conservation. Oh, really?
I think, is a pickup truck one?
It's about one.
Yeah.
Okay, it fills up one
yeah.
cubic yard.
Okay.
It fills up about a pickup truck. About 40 of those big bags that you get at the Home Depot. Yeah. So you can return as much or as little of the soil as you want to you or your family, and you just mix it because it's so nutrient dense. You mix it with like regular potting soil and you can plant anything you want in it. So it's just another way, instead of having, like an urn on the mantle, you can have a plant with.
However, the one thing you're not talking about is the carbon footprint of that. So if you look at all the energy it took to build that wall of whatever, composting machines, all the energy it takes to turn the machines, all the energy it takes to ship in the hay or whatever they're using, the carbon footprint is huge. Green burial, if you do it right, there's very, very little carbon footprint. In fact, it's regenerative when it comes right down to it. So that's something they don't talk about. It is, as Ed would say, it's a step in the right direction, but let's be transparent about it. Huge carbon footprint.
Yeah. No, you're not wrong. There is a location, the Herland Forest, and they have outdoor composting bins there. So they have an old school way of doing it there. It takes a lot longer, but it's actually like a wood drum that gets turned. And so I don't think that's what we'll see here in California. We'll probably see more of the mechanical places, but
it's a nice story, and I'll play off of that as well. Something else we should talk about is that part of their advertising is there's not enough land to bury people anymore. And it's like, wait a minute. Yes, there is plenty of land because bodies turn into land after, so there's an infinite amount of open space that bodies can go back to. So misinformation coming from, recompost and so on.
Well, here in San Diego, one of the questions about the burial at sea was, if there's not enough land here in San Diego. But here in San Diego County, we have a ton of open space and sort of conserved land or land that is able to be purchased and used out in the surrounding areas, right? Not near downtown, but 20 miles away, there's plenty of space. But we've got a question here. It says Jamie talked about renting the land from a land trust. Does San Diego County have any land trusts? Well, yes, but in San Diego County, you have to do an environmental impact study. You have to have the land. And that study costs like something like $500,000, if I'm not wrong, right?
Quite that much.
It was like
Okay.
$150,000.
Over $100,000.
Over $100,000.
Yeah.
So you need to have the land, and then you need to have the study done for the city to even consider.
Yeah, they
and
don't
you
guarantee it for that.
And they don't guarantee. So you don't know if you're going to be able to use that land. So that's sort of the roadblock here with that kind of bureaucracy.
If we can find an old cemetery that's no longer in use, that's adjacent to some land, that can kind of crack the door open a little bit.
And that's a great prototype that Ed brought, on board for inspiration around the country for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what everyone needs to know is that if this is a pre-existing non-conforming space, probably grandfathered in prior to any of these land use laws, then it is a viable burial ground. And if it has adjacent land that touches its borders, then it makes it much easier, to expand that property. So that's probably the best at this moment, the best model really to try to follow, especially down in the San Diego area, because there's no doubt in my mind, because I've done it many times, there is a pioneer cemetery sitting there lying in wait that is the absolute perfect space. It's just finding it and figuring out a way to repurpose it and create that space for the families.
Ed, we've got a question.
Wait. Claudia had a question.
Oh, sorry, Claudia.
Just give an estimate. What is the cost of these different modalities? Do you know?
What would the consumer pay? Okay, so Jamie and Ed, can you speak to pricing at your cemetery and maybe how you came to that pricing structure?
Ed just gave that figure, which you could probably repeat. You've got several cemeteries to draw from there.
Yeah, so we charge $3,500 at our cemeteries, and there's a lot of different reasons why we do that. There's a lot that goes into what we do, but ultimately for me, I could never create a space that was one of exclusivity. I have some very exclusive cemeteries within very close distance to a lot of mine who charge 5, 6, 10 times as much. But for me, this is not something that is, for just certain people. It's for everyone. And that just seems to be kind of what's come about throughout our movement. You see about 2,500 to about 3,500 on a pretty good average, but then there's plenty of places that are charging 45 or 5. But it's hard to say again, because if you're in a marketplace, real estate is all about location. So it really depends on the person and what they're trying to provide.
And it depends on the business itself. Cemeteries, there is a huge profit margin when you look at it. Our cemetery, I'm seeing it's evolving more into a community, like community supported agriculture. I think this is community supported burial because we have a lot of volunteer grave diggers, and we charge. Because we come from a conservation background, so we charge $1,200 per burial. Our cost is really about $800, all things considered. That's what it costs us to bury a body, paying everybody, the bookkeepers and so on. But the caveat, and this is where the conservation comes in, you can be buried there for $1,200, hand dug grave in a beautiful place. And however, you have to include a conservation organization in your end of life plan. You have to bequest, it could be $500 or $10 or $5 million, but that's what you have to do to join our private cemetery. And because we're not we're a private cemetery, and yet we're a nonprofit, so we're not in it to make money, more to make a difference in the world.
Thank you.
And actually, we've never turned anybody down. If somebody says, Grandpa died, we don't have enough money, we'll bury him anyway, when it comes right down to it.
We've got a couple questions. We have a question for you, Ed, in the chat. It says, Ed, what type of barriers have you come across when creating a natural cemetery? And were you successful in overcoming these barriers?
So, yeah, we've always come up against a lot of different pushback in many ways. A lot of times, people don't understand possibly who the actual owner of a particular property is that we obtain. So sometimes, see with the cemetery, sometimes cemeteries are basically in a title abyss. They're unforeclosable. The congregation that created it has passed on, and the owners of the cemetery are the residents of the cemetery. So that is always an obstacle, that can become an issue. Not if you know how to navigate that correctly. We've have a formula, and I'd be more than glad to share that with people, in particular offline, if somebody wants to reach out to me, because that's what makes a difference. We're a family. We have to continue to grow. Now, we have really run into some pushback when it comes to creating new spaces, in particular in the state of Minnesota. And a lot of that had to do, unfortunately, with what I would call NIMBYs, not in my backyard. We developed property that was perfectly zoned legal for what exactly we wanted to do. And what we ended up having was people trying to take the idea that they didn't know what needed to be done. Like there wasn't enough regulation as to what we were doing. So they tried to use that as roadblocks to prevent us from creating these spaces. But ultimately, they failed. They weren't able to do so. This is my fear, and heed what I have to say, and Jamie may agree as well. Right now, there's a lot of ability to create these spaces. As the cemetery industry is regulated, but it's not regulated as strictly as it may need to be regulated in many ways. But it also leaves the door open for people and groups like we're talking about to create these spaces at the moment without as much bureaucracy and as much expenditure. And I think that's really, really important, because I feel like maybe, just maybe, and I hope I'm wrong, that someday they'll create, as these become more popular, let's say, they'll start to create things to create revenue to create the space, which will hinder, what we're doing. So again, if anyone would ever want to talk to me outside of this conversation, because there's so much to be said, I'd be more than glad to do so.
Yeah, I echo that as well. So don't hesitate. Something else, just parlaying into it. You're saying California is big concerned about water tables, pollution coming from a body buried in the ground. There is virtually no proof, and Ed, you probably can echo that that you know single burials create any pollution. In New York, you can be buried. Our cemetery is 100 feet from a wetland. That's law, because they know that there's no pollution. It has to be 200 feet from any well, any person's well. The World Health Organization also says the same thing. That's sort of pretty much their protocol as well. And you can't bury somebody in a water table. New York, you can bury them any place you want as long as it's 200 feet from a well and so on. Yeah, California is a little anal about that, and it's not good science. Their science is off base on that. So that's another thing, we have to bring the science into this.
Agreed.
Yeah. Another question: what would be the minimum amount of land needed for? So I guess it would vary, because with green burial, you can sometimes get more people in because we kind of are stacking plots or lining up plots. With conservation burial, oftentimes folks are kind of tucked into the land. So Ed, what would be your recommendation for a minimum of a green burial, like traditional green burial? And then Jamie, I'll ask you the same question for like more conservation style.
In my personal opinion, any size cemetery is adequate. To create a space within a community so they can have it is critically important. It really doesn't come down to whether it's an acre or 3 acres or 10 acres. We all know that ultimately that you have to create these spaces in order to get other spaces opened and the opportunity for that. So I wouldn't put any number on it. I mean, if you had a small half-acre cemetery that had 50 historic burials, just know that you can accommodate probably a couple hundred more, and there would be no reason why that wouldn't benefit the community.
Absolutely. And I think you just have to look at the church cemeteries that are right in the middle of towns. And certainly in Manhattan, there's at least one, but that I know of, there are probably more. But again, there is really no evidence of pollution, even from a cemetery. I think maybe I remember eons ago where bodies were being embalmed and buried next to a lake or something. Embalming fluid ultimately, because it's a real poison and doesn't break down, would leach into the lake or river or whatever is next door. I don't know that that's fact, but that was just what I had heard. But yeah, so any size. In New York, I think we may have to have because we had to have a maximum of 3 acres, and then we could expand another 3 acres. So they limited the overall size growth of a cemetery. But I think Ed, you're probably right. You could probably backyard burials. Some places you have to have it surveyed if you're going to be in a backyard, and it can be like 10 feet by 10 feet plot, but you have to survey it. So any size, and that would be considered a cemetery if you bury a body.
Thank you. Can green burial graves be repurposed over time?
Well, I get this question a lot, and all you have to do is look to New Orleans or Louisiana or a state like that, to say that, grave reuse is perfectly legal. What it comes down to is this. As an operator, I would want to absolutely 100% know that individual who wanted their gravesite reused, would have something, a legal instrument stating such. So that way there would be no issue in the future when that gravesite was reused. So, a notarized document basically stating that in so many years that my gravesite can be reused. It wouldn't have to be a relative or a neighbor or anyone else. Now, the one thing you have to know, though, is that when you do open up a gravesite and you remove, human remains, even if it turns into soil, they can, you do need a disinterment permit. So that becomes a legal issue. So at the end of the day, it's certainly something that you're able to do if you have the right documents and the right legal structure. What I have said is maybe a tiered system might work better. Maybe saying that certain grave sites could have 3 or 4 burials and you don't disturb the lowest and and so on and so forth until that space is occupied. But just know, in Europe and other countries, it's very typical. In the United States, it is as well. People just don't realize it. So, and I've had someone say, would I do it? I would have no reason why I wouldn't. But, we just haven't had the circumstance yet. But why not? Maybe people should start to consider that.
So in our cemetery, we've just recently been talking about just having a section, of the cemetery where people that don't care, or would even prefer to be buried, in a recurring graveyard, regenerating graveyard. So just a section, but then people would obviously sign off on that's the place they want to be buried. I go back to one of the first cemeteries I went to was a Buddhist cemetery in upstate New York, and they were digging a grave right when I walked in. I started talking to the grave diggers, and I said, "You don't mark their graves?" They said, "No, we don't mark them." And I said, "Don't you dig up bodies?" Well, not very often, but if we do, it's we just if it's a bone, it will soon decompose, and we just just keep digging. So they were totally reverent. Bodies turn into earth, and there's nothing that Buddhists that particular sect made special about a body, other than it was became soil, and they honored the soil. So they just willy-nilly didn't think twice about it.
Yeah. Jamie, I want to share really quick your Gravediggers Manifesto. And if you could just speak a little bit about that, I'm going to pull it up here really quick. Just tell us a little bit about your team there and how this manifesto became to be.
So yeah, we again, a hard part of our cemetery is conservation people. So one of them is John Davis, who is now our head gravedigger. John is an author. He's a ecologist. I think he's a PhD biologist or whatever. But now he doesn't have a resume, but he says, if I had a resume, I would lead with, I'm the head gravedigger at Spirit Sanctuary. But he wrote this manifesto, which really came from his heart of what that meant to him to be a gravedigger. And we're obviously not going to read it here. I'm not going to anyway. But go to our website and read it. It's just really inspirational and heartfelt from a guy who just loves what he's doing and really volunteers his time to do it. And yeah, it's just inspirational about how we can be inspired by the end of life, particularly when it comes to what we're talking about is green burials. And that's, we all are talking about it. And I just, it makes me smile to see this kind of conversation happening.
Yeah. And it goes just so much beyond just green burial, right? Like, I mean, you can see the human element here and
Yeah.
how it's impacting lives. Yeah. Question, Jenna. Brenna, sorry.
That's okay. I'm just curious because we have people who have been doing this actually, not like us in San Diego who don't have access to it. Is anybody familiar with anybody who has attempted to merge this effort with setting up a mitigation bank for habitat conservation? Because if you're going to establish a mitigation bank, you have to do an environmental impact report. So if that effort can be joined and say, as part of this mitigation bank, we're also going to introduce green burials, that seems kind of like a win-win potentially. And the mitigation bank itself makes money. Like they sell credits, so it's another revenue source. And the people that establish those banks, like they have that other revenue source and ability to fund things like environmental impact reports. So if we could potentially find a company that does that thing, that's interested, that may be a way to get into it. I'm curious if anybody has done that.
I'll speak up first. I think that's a wonderful project. I think Ed would agree with that. And it sounds like you're pretty inspired about that. Do you want to work with us to get that going?
Well, I am a field biologist and I work in environmental consulting. So I kind of basically understand this concept and both of us have helped prepare environmental impact reports. Is what we do for a living. So I haven't actually worked much on mitigation banks, but the whole concept I understand, and there are companies that do this. And it seems like if we could get somebody's buy-in, they got to go through the process anyway. And it would just be another part of the project.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That's why we love coming together and having these conversations, because you have this knowledge that we had no idea about. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, we'll maybe offline talk about it a little more.
That's why I wanted you guys to come today, because I wanted you to get in touch with Jamie too, because I think
actually Camp Pendleton, Department of the Navy, they do work with the Fallbrook Land Conservancy and mitigation properties. So that would be a good place to start.
Okay. All right, I'm taking notes. Okay.
Jamie, I'll make sure you guys all have contacts, get each other's contacts information too.
Great.
Any other questions here in the house? Anybody online have any other questions?
So yeah, as Ed said, don't hesitate to reach out to either of us for sure.
Oh yeah, let me put up, I have our contact information here. Let me put that up really quick. And I will send out this recording to everybody too. There's our contact information. What happened to my picture? Well, you see what I look like. Oh, that's weird.
Hey, where'd you go? You're ghosting us.
I'm ghosting you guys. Yes, ghosting. Tara and I are both on the Death Network website. You can find our contact information there, or Instagram at the Death Network. Ed is at the Global Green Burial Alliance, and he's on Instagram as a Global Green Burial Alliance. And Jamie Phillips from Spirit Sanctuary, and their website, Spirit Sanctuary, NY for New York.org. So you can reach out to us if you have any other questions. We really appreciate you joining us and having this important conversation. And we look forward to seeing you in the near future. So
all right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Penny. Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
thanks,
Tara.
everybody. We will see you all soon.
Thanks.
Bye
Thanks,
now.
Jamie.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.